This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, episode 142.
Welcome to the show created by vets featuring absolutely no pets. This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, hosted by Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light. Our resident veterinarians have swapped out their stethoscopes in favor of microphones to bring you the Veterinary Project Podcast, a show focused on real conversations, aimed to connect this amazing profession full of remarkable people. Through the sharing of collective stories and wisdom, and connecting over the many unique challenges we face, we invite you to join our community of veterinary professionals leading intentional lives. And now, here are the hosts of the Veterinary Project Podcast, Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Veterinary Project Podcast. We just wrapped amazing episode. This was a fun one. Jonathan, how did it land?
Well, I'm going to say we're up to 142, and this is definitely in the top three, without a doubt.
Yeah, I'm excited. You guys are in for a treat with this episode. This is one of my mentors. I don't know if he knows that I call him that, but he's one of my mentors. Been following him for a long time. I mean, thought leader for sure, but one of the most intuitive humans I've ever had the chance of chatting with and encountering.
Absolutely. And a gentleman that, how do we put it? We even put it on the podcast, right? Just knows how to cut through the chaff and get to it and describe. And he has some pretty darn important messages that I think many of us in the veterinary community, myself included, need to listen to. As I shared with you and him after the recording, I will be listening to this, not in the truck, but with a notepad. And there is a lot of wisdom to be shared for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. So I guess, we don't need to stall anymore on our guest. This Philip McKernan, I get into the story here once we bring him on. But there's kind of moments in your life that I guess we'll say you like, what's the saying? You don't remember what people say, but you remember how they made you feel. And I can still remember the first time I heard him speak, where it was kind of like, if this is even a thing, the most loving punch to the gut. And where it's like with immense compassion, respectfully calling bullshit and being like, okay, let's have a real conversation.
Well, and buddy, like you've done the work as well. You took the punch and then you said, hey, I'm not going to fall down and just allow myself to be the victim of that punch and blame him for punching me. You did the work, and this is years in the making. I'm not going to kill the story. But again, you're the perfect example of somebody that's actually done something with it. So yeah, I think there's some individuals that need to listen to this. Like I said, I'll be one of them again.
Okay. Well, let's get to it. Now, this is one episode where even you and I are stumped for banter, right? We're like, well, for our listeners, we literally just finished recording. So we come back, we're doing this intro now, and we're like, what are we going to banter about? And we're like, oh, there's really not much to say. Let's just introduce them and get on with the show. So, alrighty. Philip, who you're going to hear from here shortly, Philip works with entrepreneurs and business leaders all over the world. When people are seeking clarity about their future or want to move through roadblocks, seen and unseen, they call Philip. As a speaker, he has inspired and challenged the Canadian Olympic team and the Pentagon, to name a few. He is also the founder and is spearheading the One Last Talk movement. He helps people get clear on who they are and where they need to go. He helps them transition in their personal and professional lives so people feel aligned in all areas of life. Philip McKernan is a modern-day philosopher of the human experience. His pioneering philosophy around soul set equips and empowers people to uncover their gifts and impact the world. You're going to enjoy this one. You're going to want to listen to it again. I'm very excited to give you Philip McKernan. All right, Philip, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it. Good to be here.
I've got a big smirk. I'm excited for this one, Philip. I'm excited to unleash you on the veterinary world. I thought I would tell a very quick story of how you and I met, and then we can transition into the work you do. But meeting you was one of the more impactful moments of my life. So I don't know if you remember this, because I know you do a lot of events, but 2014, I fly out to Nanaimo, BC for a real estate mastermind. So a very small group setting. There couldn't have been more than 15 or 20 of us there. I'm a very rookie, very novice, naive real estate investor at this point. And I remember we go to break and the itinerary for the weekend had a blank, right? Like mystery guest, mystery speaker. So no clue who's coming. And we're all kind of off to the side. And all of a sudden there's some rumblings. It's Philip McKernan is here. Philip McKernan is the next speaker. And of course I puffed my chest up. I don't want to be the only one that has no clue who Philip McKernan is. So I'm like, Oh, wow. He must be some real estate guru here. And we're going to get the latest, hottest tips on real estate investing. So we pile back into the room. We're sitting in a U shape, right? You jump in the middle of that. And I have to be completely honest. I do not remember the exact words you said, but I certainly remember how I felt. I can remember exactly where I'm sitting. And it took you about 2 seconds to disarm all of the ego in the room, all of the stories, all the facade that everyone was wearing. And we didn't talk one lick about real estate investing, right? You dove into fulfillment, meaning, happiness. And it was one of the most profound live sort of discussions I've ever been a part of. So I would describe that as intuition. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'll turn it over to you. Tell our audience about the work you do, because I still remember that day. And that was the first, I think the only time I've met you in person.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You're bringing me back. A couple of things. I think it was amazing because Julie and Dave, I believe, are the hosts. And I think it was admirable for them to bring, not me personally, leave me aside. And by the way, if it's any consolation, at most events I go to, public facing events, I'm the speaker that no one has ever heard of. So I've gotten used to that. So I'm not going to be offended by that at all. And if your audience haven't heard of me, I'm not going to take that personally at all. I just hope that today that we can bring something to them that'll better their lives. And that's my wish today. But I remember Julie asking me, where do we slot you in? And I just said, well, what are you trying to achieve? Is it just about teaching people how to build real estate and become wealthy? Because the challenge with that is that they can often become misaligned and assume that the wealth that comes with it is going to equal freedom, and the freedom is going to equal happiness. And that often isn't the case. And she said, well, what do you recommend? I said, I think we should bring in the purpose, the direction, the personal piece first, and then you can layer in your teachings afterwards. And she went for that. And I think it's really, really cool. Likewise, I think it's great that you guys are bringing this type of dialogue and conversation to the veterinary practice and the world, because I think it's something that is secondary and it's often assumed we'll get to that when we retire or when we build enough of momentum. How would I describe my work? I don't know how to describe my work. Am I deeply intuitive? Absolutely. Where do I get that from? I get that from the landscape of Ireland, where I'm sitting in today. I get that from my mother, who, God love her, who has never really honored that intuition. I see and I feel things at a very deep level, and I've always had that. Some people call it a gift. I've always had that ability. I never trusted it. I thought it was weird. I never thought I'd actually lean in and use that. And I think we have this deep intuitive sense of ourselves, what we're here to do in the world and how we can show up. But a lot of us ignore that and we get ourselves into trouble and we get misaligned and we do things professionally, whether it's become a vet or not, and suddenly look back and say, shit, there's something I missed along the way. And my job is to act as a mirror. I'm good at what I do, but I'm not as great as everyone thinks. I don't have the answers. I might appear to, but I don't. I fucking don't have the answers. But what I'm really good at is creating the space for people to draw the inspiration and clarity and wisdom out of themselves that has lay there abundant and ignored perhaps for a long time. And my job is to act as that mirror to bring that out. And I love it. And I get judged for it, and I get loved for it, and I get applauded for it, and I get shut down for it, and all of the above.
Wow. Okay. Speaking firsthand, the last I'll say on is it is like you could reach into people's souls. Like they would start answering and you'd be like, no, not the bullshit answer, the real answer. So in your process, how do you help people uncover that truth or trust their intuition?
Well, I guess they've got to be at a pivotal point in their lives. They've got to be at a point where I often say that people will sometimes travel thousands of miles and in some cases pay either hundreds or thousands of dollars to sit in front of me for the clarity that they don't actually want. In other words, they either want to be seen to do the work or they want to prove to themselves that they're doing the work, but they don't actually want the answers. They don't want to face the truth. And that's not a judgment. I would have said that in a much more judgmental way. They're trying to protect themselves. They've got this scaffolding, which is a story or a series of stories and narratives that they tell themselves, this is it. I can't do anything else. I have to be this. I have to be that. Parenting is hard. Marriage is difficult. Being a vet is very challenging. You have to scale. You don't have to scale. We have all these stories, and a lot of them are constructs that we've created to keep us on a certain path to protect ourselves. I feel that a lot of what I do is not just to call bullshit on people, but to push back, sensing what they're saying and trying to match that to who I believe they are in front of me, the person sitting in front of me. So it's a felt sense. When someone gives me an answer, I just have this feeling. And if nothing else, I'll test it. I'll push back and I'll go. And when I push back, their reaction tells me an awful lot. I'll give you a quick example. I had a gentleman fly in from Vancouver to a 7-day immersive experience that we run in Ireland. And he flew in, and the first couple of days, we believe wholeheartedly that it's so critically important that we understand, not just intellectually, but emotionally, our origin stories. because where we've come from is determined to some extent who we are today. Whether we have this amazing relationship with business and money and relationships, or whether we have dysfunctionality in there. How we make decisions, where we make them from. Are we making them from a scarce place, an abundant place? Are they restricted? Are they wide? And we bring people back into their past. And often, generally always, we experience joy and happiness, but we also uncover pain. Pain that we knew existed and pain that we didn't think existed. And this one man, and there's a purpose to this, by the way, this one man said, but I had this amazing childhood. And I said, would you call it perfect? He goes, well, yeah, in my humble opinion, there is no such thing. There's no such thing as the perfect human, the perfect life, the perfect childhood, or the perfect future, or the perfect business, etc. And he just said, but Philip, that's my memory. And all I said to him was, Scott, what if you did nothing other than challenge that for the next couple of days? Like, just question it. Just say, what if that story that I've told myself and I've been told isn't actually 100% accurate? And he said, I can do that. The following morning, he came in, he put his hand up. You don't need to put your hand up in my room, trust me. And he said, can I speak? I said, of course. He said, you know the story about cycling around my bike and the freedom and how alive I was and everything else? And with tears starting to emerge in his eyes, he said, it's bullshit. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I was just lonely. I just spent so much time on my own. And I've never seen until literally today, last night and this morning, that story was just a story I held on because the opposite of that was too painful. Now, you might say, well, why would you help him uncover that? Isn't ignorance bliss? Isn't that just naivety and not knowing? Isn't he better there? No, because by understanding that, he can now see the parallels of how he has created a construct in his current life that he is an island. And he says, I thought I was close to my kids. I'm not. I thought I was really close to my wife, but I don't open up to her. I shield myself. I have a wall around my heart. I tell myself that I have this open door policy in my business. I don't. I keep people at bay. And they can only walk in and tell me the truth as long as it's something I want to hear. He said, actually, I can be a bit of an asshole because he's trying to protect. And he went home, and I'm not going to give you, I'm not even going to try to be obnoxious enough to try to bullshit you or your audience. He went home and his life was perfect. Of course it wasn't. Because as I said, there's no such thing. But he did go back and make changes. And he allowed people in, and he connected deeper. And he allowed himself to process the pain of the past as well as the joy. And he pivoted and used that to shape the direction of his life. And that's the power of understanding our origin stories as one part of the work we do.
That process of helping people, not define, that's the wrong word, determine their origin story. How did you come to understand that they have to go there in order to make the changes they need in their life? And then I've got a follow-up question.
Oh, Jonathan, you're great. Just such a great question. I would achieve something in life. I would get to the top of a mountain. And I don't mean finish line. I mean, I would achieve something. I would create a business. I would create a goal, a financial goal, whatever. And I was good at creating goals, and I was even better at achieving them. And I had this insatiable appetite to keep going and achieving. And I would get to the top of the mountain, and I would, just a metaphor for achieving something, regardless how big or significant it is. And I would stand on the top of that mountain and I would go, oh my God, I made it. And then I would look around and I would wait for the euphoric feeling, the sense of satisfaction, the deep sense of pride and ownership. And it just didn't come. And I would just go, okay, what have I missed? And I go, oh no, I climbed the wrong mountain. So I kind of come off the mountain metaphorically. I'd go across the meadows, I climb the next mountain. And I just kept doing this and I kept missing. There was something just missing in my life, this sense of just, there's something out there and I can't quite put my finger on it. And long story short, I ended up in therapy, kind of accidentally, but I was way too cool for therapy. I wasn't vulnerable or courageous enough to do it. So I did it under the auspice of, I'm going to go and just check out what this therapy is. But it's not really for me. But if I ever meet someone like, Mike, I can recommend it to him, or Jonathan, I have a referral base, etc. And the guy asked me, he said, just tell me about your life. And I think in 45 seconds, I was oscillating between anger, sadness, and fleeting moments of gratitude. And I came out, and I'll finish here. It was actually a house I met him. And I came out of the house and I bent over, my hands on my thighs, and I bent over. And I was afraid. I thought I was going to vomit. And I'm sorry about the gross description, but I was afraid to vomit because I thought every organ I had was going to come with it. Because I realized, and I had told myself a story of my childhood and my adolescence, and I don't have that much stress or pain or trauma. And I did in my own way. And I realized that that was the day my life truly started to shift in the right direction, because I realized that my gift lay right next to my deepest wound in my life. And that's where I needed to go in order to understand who I was at the essence of, at the core of who I am as a human.
And do you think you were at a pivotal point in that life where you were able to recognize that versus just see it as, hey, it's a therapy session. I got to a place that was uncomfortable. move on. Because, and what I'm speaking about is back to the veterinary profession. There are a lot of individuals, and again, I'm generalizing, that are trying to figure out what they want to do next, whether that's in veterinary medicine, a different role within their own profession, personal profession. So just trying to understand that in the context of those that may be listening.
Yeah, I'm trying to be accurate here because it's very easy to look back in
Mhm.
hindsight and say that was a pivotal moment. It changed my life and everything was awesome afterwards. And now the Hollywood ending
Amazing.
is everything's great. But I think I'd done such a great job of hiding from myself and hiding from who I was that truly, when I went to that therapy session, way too late, by the way. I mean, I should have gone years early, way too late. It was so desperate. I waited too long. I waited for the pain to get bad enough. And the pain at that point was bad enough. And I wish that most people wouldn't wait that long. So in that case, I was truly in pain. And I think there was a form of desperation. And that when that hit me between the eyes, it was a wake up moment. Now, I didn't have crystal clarity about what was next as a result, but I certainly had crystal clarity about what I'd been doing was wrong. And I say wrong, I mean, it wasn't complete and I felt off here in my body. So sometimes understanding what is not working can be as effective as beginning to try to figure out what will work. So for example, if you're living in Vegas, as I often say, and you don't like it, you go, well, I just don't know where to move. And the answer is, if it's that debilitating and that horrible on your body and your system and your soul, the answer to the question is anywhere. Just don't move and build a mansion or buy a house and create another prison for yourself. Just experiment and just see what happens.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing.
So I'm curious, Philip, in that, you started to have this something pulling at you and talking about moving into your gifts. And from listening to your story, I'm assuming you were wildly talented, right? You achieved all these goals. Can you differentiate, someone that leans on their talents versus someone that leans into their gifts?
Yeah, it's a big question and it's a really big answer. Not an easy one, I can tell you off the bat. But what has just come to me, and I've never spoken about this in this way before, but what has come to me, and I'm actually thinking about your audience or your primary audience. And I'm thinking about my wife, who's an accountant by trade and studied for, I'm guessing, I don't remember exactly, but something like 6 years in total. And let's imagine like one of the scenarios is you begin to realize that you don't want to be an accountant, or it's just not for you, for example. And when you contemplate, sometimes a lot of us are looking for clarity, but I always say courage comes first. And the courage, when I talk about courage, we put way too much emphasis on execution. Oh my God, that guy was so courageous to set up the first veterinary practice on Bowen Island in off British Columbia. Or, oh my God, he was the first or she was the first to go virtual or whatever. And great, well done for execution. I think the greatest courage comes from questioning the essence of our existence. And I don't mean all the time, because we'd undermine ourselves and we'd feel bad all the time, but stopping and saying, is this it? To have the courage to stop and ask the question, is this who I am and is this who I'm meant to be? Is being a vet right for me? Am I aligned? Is this bringing me alive? Or is the way in which I'm doing it? So perhaps maybe my goal is to have 15 practices and sell out. Great in theory, because the world wants us to scale and it rewards us for the idea of busyness and chaos. But scaling's not for everybody, because you can lose yourself in that scale. And it has such a detrimental effect that 10 years later, you're so goddamn exhausted. You get your check and it's like, fuck, now what? So where I'm going with this is, if I'm sitting there and I'm imagining that accounting is not for me, being a vet is not for me, I have so much more to either give up or lose. Because one of the tragedies for a lot of people, and I think it's mistaken, is to go, I'm going to waste 6 years. I'm going to waste 8 years. I can't turn my back on that. So that was one thing I didn't have because of my dyslexia and because of my learning disabilities. I didn't go to college. So I didn't have to turn around and go, that degree I did, I'm going to waste that. So for me, pivoting and shifting in that regard was easier because society is set up in a way that you go to college, you study something. I think one of the greatest challenge for vets is that not just do you come out the other end if you're successful in your study and you become a qualified vet, and maybe you work under somebody, maybe the aspirations to own your own practice, or maybe you're going to work in the corporate space by one of the bigger companies coming through and you're going to serve. I personally think, not just making assumptions, but based on my experience with vets, is that there's an assumption that it's going to be successful at some point, that you're going to get paid well. There's an assumption that you're going to be satisfied because you're really helping. You're helping animals, you're helping owners, and you're helping that relationship. You're doing something good in the world, and you're applauded in society. Because if you think about the top professions that you looked up to in pedestals, it was in Ireland religion, being a priest. Now it's doctors, vets, nurses, even more so after COVID, things like that. In the US, it's the military, maybe Canada to some extent as well. I don't know as much about that, but you're elevated. And so the guilt that comes with questioning that must be absolutely enormous. the guilt associated with stopping and saying, fuck, what if this is not for me after all of this? Sacrifice from my parents, financial outlay, student debt. I have no right to quit. I get to do what lots of people in society desperately want to do, which is to become a vet. Now I have the privilege of getting here, which is not a privilege. You've fucking earned it. And now I'm questioning it. I have no right to feel like that. And we see this in the US with the military. They're put up onto a pedestal. They didn't ask for that. And no wonder they have so much depression and so much suicide and so much drug abuse and so much disconnection. And you go back to, I'll finish here. If you go back to the origins of why everyone who's ever joined the military, I'm only speaking about the US. If you go back to the origins of why they joined for some of the following reasons, primary reasons. One, anger, reaction from 9/11, for example. There was a massive spike. I'm not judging it. I'm just creating an observation. Is that the best motivation to join and to hang your hat on a career? Two is, I don't know what else to do, so I'll just join the military. It's a slightly easier, more navigable path. Three, I want healthcare and education for myself and my family, etc. But the same applies for everything. What ultimately is driving you to get into it? Are you still living up to your parents? Are you academically inclined? Are you being pushed this way? Is it because you don't know what else? So we could spend hours just on this one subject alone, but I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'll keep going all over the place.
Well, I'm going to push you slightly back into it because the thing that jumps out to me is, we have this idea of, is your greatest work yet to come? Yeah. And on the other side, maybe I'll call it identity, and all of everything you just said, all of it wrapped up in there. And we have this identity we've created, but maybe there is a greater work. Maybe there are greater gifts. How does someone shed, I guess, that identity that they've created and all those stories they've created around it?
I think rather than shedding it, I think what they do is loosen the identity a little bit to create some cracks and to see what comes. So let's just use a mountain analogy. I've been using mountain analogies for years. There's also a book out there called The Second Mountain. So I'm not trying to knock the concept, but I'm trying to elaborate or expand a little bit on it. So mountain one is often about survival. It's about getting to the top of the mountain, educating yourself, getting to a place where you're surviving. Mountain two, and think about this as an evolutionary concept for people, moving to a place of more meaning and satisfaction in life. Mountain two, so that could be quite a selfish mountain, getting to the point where you're just surviving for yourself or your family, paying your way. The second mountains, we start to awaken to this idea is like, no, but I want to make an impact in the world. I want to leave the world in a better place than I found it. So imagine I'm a vet and I say, well, I own a practice. I'm going to set up 2 more practices. I'm now employing 35 people. Wow, I'm employing 35 people. I help 35 people put bread and butter on the table for themselves and their families. Wow. So I see that as mind-related work that stimulates the mind, that's survival. Heart-centered work or heart-related work that is, you're creating a company and a culture. And none of these are wrong, by the way. It's just evolution. I help all these people. And by the way, we have enough profit at the end of the year that I can write checks to build an orphanage and do this and do that. I'm feeling really good about myself. My experience is it's still not enough. And imagine you're looking across the horizon and they're the 2 mountains that face you. But if you keep walking to your right, there's another mountain that appears. And that is what I call soul work. That is a deep form of artistry. It's a deep form of emotional work that comes from no other place than your own personal experience. So if I bring that home a little bit closer to Philip McKernan, and I try not to talk as much about my story than I do about client stories, but somebody asked me recently, what drives you? Like, why are you doing this? Because it ain't for the money. There's a lot of easier ways to make money than doing what I do. I promise you that. I was in real estate and that would have been so much easier for me in many ways. And why I do what I do, and I don't declare this publicly, you won't find this on my website, is I ultimately had a really lonely existence. I had a very lonely childhood. And I didn't want to relive that. And when I went back to therapy, that was the beginning of me beginning to realize how fucking unbelievably lonely I was. Fast forward, and it's not quite as simple as that, but fast forward, why I exist, why I'm on this earth is to eradicate loneliness for as many people as I can before I die. How do I do that? How I do that is I help them connect with the 3 core elements of life: meaningful work, meaningful external relationships, and a deep, meaningful, connected relationship with yourself, like healthy, not an arrogance, I love myself and I'm amazing. I mean, I'm proud of myself. I actually like myself, which most people don't. And that is the way in which I'm going to eradicate loneliness. So if you can connect soul work to your own personal narrative, that is the gift. That is the gift. That is the essence of bringing your gift. And the journey, the end of the journey, is to go back into the world. And you don't have to monetize it. You don't have to write a book. You don't have to be a public speaker. You don't have to shift the perspective for 2 or 5 or 50 million people. It could be simply for the people next to you called your children or your loved ones. When I work with couples, again, pain in the ass work, because to try to get 2 people to agree to go and spend time on themselves, they don't have to face shit in the future. And people think I give a shit about couples. I don't really give a shit about couples. But the reality is most couples happen to have things that sit behind them, not all couples, and they're called children. When I work with a couple and I help them identify shit that is just little hairline cracks today that will ultimately be a Grand Canyon if they're not careful, somebody said to me, oh God, you're so driven to help couples. I really don't give a shit about couples. I mean, I do, but I don't. But when you hear the connection, when you hear how they connect with their children for the first time in their lives, or maybe the first time in 10 years or 20 years, when you hear that, you go, that's why I do what I do. And that to me is connecting, going beyond your talent. There's nothing wrong with talent, but beginning to climb or at least examine the last mountain, which is your gift. Because if you go to the grave and having never examined your gift and your gift dying with you, that is a fucking tragedy that the world doesn't need, and I don't think you need. That to me is the greatest tragedy that's out there.
And so that is your soul set, right? You've kind of coined that term. I'm sure our listeners have heard a lot about mindset, but when they hear you speak of soul set, that is what you're referring to, and that's the work you're doing. That's
the journey. The shift is from mindset to soul set, and it's not abandoning mindset and saying it's wrong. When you're going up the first mountain, even perhaps the second mountain, we use the intellect to achieve that. We set these audacious or small goals in some cases, audacious goals in others. We use a lot of intellect and study and books and copious amounts of information that we consume. And that's fine. That's great. That's brilliant. Well done. But I think there's a point where we start to go, maybe I don't need any more books just for a period. What wisdom do I have inside me that needs to come out? Where can I begin to show up and experiment and play? And to me, that is just dropping out of our heads, connecting with our intuition, connecting with our pain, connecting with our joy, and beginning to come from that place, from a slightly more intuitive place. And the science around intuition is immense, but that's what we refer to as soul set. There just has to be place for both.
Man, I kind of want to keep going back. I think of myself, and it's like we have so much training operating in our head. Like that's the answer to all of our problems is you can think it through. I know for me personally, it has taken, I don't know if effort's the right word, but a lot to try and drop down into, the gut and the intuition.
Yeah. And where I think is really prevalent in a slightly destructive way, and I think both of you being entrepreneurial leaders, male, it's not just male, but I think you probably relate to this. If we're all honest in this call, we'll all relate to this. And where I see this, for example, show its head is that in business, there's probably not a challenge I could throw at you in your business, like an operational challenge that you could, it might piss you off, it might stress you, it might drag out for a period of time, but you probably could solve it. Where I find is that a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs take that mindset and bring it home. And they try to fix what is an emotional problem with an intellectual solution. And every time we do that, it's like a mini nuclear bomb. And I've worked with couples enough, and it's just one part of what we do. It's a very tiny part of what we do, to know that one of the most annoying things, and might sound sexist, but I'm going to use a male, female, is when a man comes home and his partner is saying, I'm struggling, I don't know what my purpose is. And the guy goes, well, just figure it out. Or they say, well, we'll go on this program. Or they send you a link on Google to say, well, here's the steps to be happy. And then they justify it under the lens and the bracket of, but honey, I just want you to be happy, which is one of the most annoying things you can say to anybody, particularly a woman, because they probably don't even know what happiness actually feels like at all, truly, because their benchmark for happiness is what they've lived rather than what's possible in their lives. So we tend to take this. I work with superly successful entrepreneurs, and they're going, but I don't understand why my husband or my wife doesn't see this. I'm trying to fix it. It's obvious to me, Philip, which makes them feel even more inadequate. But you can do that intellectually in your business. You can't do that in relationships. And that's why success in business and in the boardroom doesn't translate to success in the bedroom. And I don't mean that in a sexual context. I mean that in a home context.
So I know I've heard you speak a lot about environment. Now, where I'm going with this is, how do you set things up for connection? Right? Like if that's something that's difficult for you and maybe you're just stepping into it, how can you put yourself in that environment to open yourself up to connect and to receive connection?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people don't realize, I mean, I'm literally making this up, but think about an internet connection. I happen to have the most insane internet connection you wouldn't believe. And one of the problems in the castle up the road is that we have, no disrespect to Elon Musk, but Starlink, and it's not as effective as this. We have this incredible, even though I lived in Boulder and it wasn't as good there. So I'm sitting here and I'm working away and everything's fine. And somebody says, how's your connection? I go, oh, it's amazing. And they're across the road and they go, whatever, download speeds or whatever. And I go, yeah, I think I have that. And I check and I go, hang on a second. I don't have that set of speed. I'm unaware that there's a lack of connection. And I think that's the challenge for a lot of people who come and do my work is they'll buy a new computer. They'll buy a new, I had a guy who actually is flying in on Monday to spend some time with me privately from London. And one of his reasons for not taking the time was two reasons. One is I don't want to take time away from my kids. And secondly, it's expensive to come and do one-to-one work with you. And I went back and I said, this can piss people off. And I said, number one is I'm not going to buy the kids one because the work you do with me, the biggest beneficiaries are going to be the people around you. Okay. They're going to come home to somebody who's inspired, aligned, and happier in life and more outgoing, et cetera, more connected and more emotionally available. So to me, don't give me your kids as an excuse. They're the beneficiaries of this. If you're struggling financially, let's talk about it. But if you're driving your X5, or you're driving your BMW, whatever the hell it is, do not tell me that it's a financial thing. That's you just not putting a value on your own personal growth. So for me, often it's a lack of awareness. This stupid cliche thing that drives us all nuts often is we don't know what we don't know. It's helping people get in touch with the real cost of not changing. People often say, well, this work is hard. No, it's not. I'll tell you what's hard. What's hard is ignoring this type of conversation and dialogue and work and waking up in 20 or 30 years from now, looking back and saying, oh, good God, my kids are gone. My partners there are gone. And I have no idea who I am. And I don't know where the last 20 years went. That's hard. So for me, helping people connect is easy as long as they're aware of a lack of connection to begin with. And they're aware of the true cost of not changing the landscape. And if I could sum it up very simply, relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. I was at a conference and somebody put this quote up on the thing and people go, oh, that's a really good quote and everything else. And I'm thinking, oh, that's pretty interesting. Sounds familiar. And they goes, yeah, this is a Philip McKernan quote. This was a conference where I think somebody knew me. And I went, oh, is that a quote of mine? But apparently it's a quote of mine. But relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. The problem is when you say that to somebody who's very intellectual, they go, oh, vulnerability. Hey, hubby, wife, kids, let's all sit down tonight and let's all be vulnerable and connect. That's not how it works. So that's why going back into your origin story to understand the landscape of connection for you, what did you model? What did you witness? What was your school? Not your school, but what your school was your home. Did your parents love each other? Oh, yeah, absolutely. They love it. How do they show? I don't remember them ever hugging. I don't remember them ever saying, I love you. It's not wrong. We're not vilifying them. We're just understanding the landscape that you grew up with to understand where you are today and therefore where you're going to be in the future. Am I making any sense?
Absolutely. I love the true cost part. That one, that lands. And did you have something, Jonathan?
I'm very quickly on this one. If there's somebody sitting here now or in the future listening to this and they go, yeah, no, I'm really connected to my partner or whatever. Great. Ask them. Do you think I'm connected? Do you think I open up to you? Nope. Really? Yeah, you're very guarded. Really? And don't take it personally. Just be curious about it. So we're not the best judge of whether we're open and connected and fully alive. There's a whole level of connection available to us, deeper than we can ever fathom. But we're not the best to judge it because we base our lives based on what we know and who we've been rather than what's possible in the future. Sorry, Jonathan. Excuse me if I cut across you there.
I've got a different question, Phil. And this, I don't know where this is going to take us. So you're not afraid of calling out the bullshit. You can cut right through it. I can hear it. I've listened to your podcast and not done some of the work that Mike's done with you in the past. But there is a lot of hesitation in our world. Again, I'm generalizing to try and protect, and I'm using that in quotation, others' emotions. And I will be frank in saying I am guilty of that at times. And it's horrible as a leader where I should just call it out as it is and describe where I see this individual or want to work with this individual. How do we go about being less sensitive, and especially in veterinary medicine right now, because there's some tough discussions that should be had and they're not being had. And I listen to you and I listen to you going, we can't get there until we share how vulnerable we are. We can't get there until we go into our origin story. But I don't hear a lot of that happening in our industry right now. And I don't know if it's personality based. I don't know if it's scared of showing themselves. And heck, I'm part of it. So, and I'm a leader in this space. So I'm the one that's also supposed to be cutting through the bullshit. And it's so, I don't know if this is an individual question or a profession question, but it's real. That's the only thing I know.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Regardless of the origin of the question, I appreciate the opportunity and the vulnerability of that. And I think this has been said multiple times, the vulnerability is seen as weakness. And I don't give a shit what people say, it's still seen as weakness. I think you're unfortunate in a sense, and I don't mean you personally, I mean you guys, you're in an industry that vulnerability is really, I mean, you live and operate in an industry that is born, bred, and breeds on vulnerability. because animals
Sure is.
are some of the most vulnerable species on earth because they rely so
Yes.
heavily on humanity. Yet my experience is vets are not equally vulnerable or even remotely vulnerable to the same speed or opportunity in the very industry you find yourself in. And there's a guardedness, but I think ultimately, to be fair to vets, is that there's not a space for it. You need to be the all-seeing, strong individual. The military are the same. And I think as a result of that, you end up breathing some of the most insecure people that are secretly insecure. And I say insecure, I don't mean weak and bad and everything else. I just mean that you don't get an opportunity to share the vulnerabilities and the sadnesses and the different things. And therefore, it compounds and compounds and compounds. And it will always come back and haunt you. It will always catch up. So I'm assuming you know lots, or you've come across, or you will, lots of people who have been vets for 20 years. On paper, they're successful, or at least they're moving in the right direction. But they hit an emotional wall and they go, the fuck's wrong with me? And we just go, it's a midlife crisis. A midlife crisis is nothing other than your life catching up with you. So to me, when I hear the terms you just call bullshit, yes, but I think it comes from such a deep well. I don't get there. I think there are people in the world that call bullshit and are very vocal, and I think they do it for theater. And somebody think I do it for theater. I don't feel I do it for theater. There's such a deep well of inspiration and hope and deep sadness that I carry every day. And that is, I get so much judgment because of the way I show up in the world. But I've allowed, there's been a shift, and it oscillates sometimes. Sometimes when I get insecure, my need to be seen and liked suddenly elevates. But I've got to a point where waking, not me waking people up, but people waking up to themselves, to their gifts, to their beauty, is so much more important than me being liked. And that's why people who do work with me often say, I have a love-hate relationship with you. I love the fact that I've worked with coaches before. Not all coaches are like this, but they'll tell you what they want to hear. They don't have the courage or the conviction to go right in and challenge you. But one thing I'll always do is I'll retract and apologize if I'm wrong. I have no problem with that. I'm not sure I'm answering your question specifically, but I think that, and another thing, I've had vets reach out to me, and I'm not trying to vilify vets as an industry or individuals, but they'll often go, oh, you do a lot of group work. Yeah, yeah. So I'd be in a group of people. And I go, yeah. And it's more about, I don't want to be seen to be vulnerable in a group rather than, you know what, this is just goddamn important. I'm so exhausted. I just need to do the work. It doesn't matter with who, how, in front of people. It doesn't really matter. So there's this unfortunate landscape of a lack of vulnerability in the irony in the very industry that is one of the most fundamentally vulnerable from the ground up.
And you can call it passion fatigue. You can call it, the overwhelming burden. And we become psychologists in the exam room for individuals that are struggling with their own stories, again, related to those pets, et cetera. And, similar to the military, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, we do struggle with an inordinate amount of suicide and other really complex mental diseases
22 military personnel a day committing suicide in the United States. Sorry, John,
Yes.
there was a delay there.
Yes.
22 military a day committing suicide in the United States.
It's unbelievable. I saw, and veterinary medicine, we're not in a healthy spot there right now either.
So let me just talk about something for a second. So imagine you've either turned this audio or video off, or you're just about to because you're feeling angry, you're frustrated, you're uncomfortable, right? So that means it's stirring something inside of you, or you're leaning in and you want more, or you're not aligned to this conversation, whatever. But I always say to people who are reacting to the conversation, this is a time to stop the video or the audio, just take a breath and just come back into it because something is stirring inside of you. So imagine that you've ultimately, the origin of that is in some way, shape, or form, you're misaligned, even though you've checked all of the goals and aspirations that you would have wished for 5 or 10 years ago. You've gotten to a place and there's something still off. I wouldn't say wrong, but there's something just off, or maybe it feels significantly off. Where do you go to have that conversation? Who do you share that with? Without people going, but you'll be fine. Or, sure, what's your problem? Look at what's happening around the world. Look at all the wars. At least you can afford to pay your mortgage. Oh, do you see interest rates are going up? And there's not a place, I think, for vets to do that. But imagine that is happening for you right now. And then you hear the story about this gift versus a talent. You go, God, maybe I've worked from a place of talent. I'm a really good vet, but maybe it's not my full gift. I got to give this up and chase my gift. I mean, that just feels like too much. No. What about an experiment? What if you just started to write? Oh, you mean a blog and we could monetize in a membership? No, I didn't say that. What if you were just to start writing? But for who? Just for you. What if you were to contemplate walking into a school and speaking about veterinary? I said, no, it's about your challenges. What if you spoke in front of a group of young men and women in your local school and you say, guys, I'm a vet and I make X amount of dollars a year and who here wants to be a vet? And everyone puts their hand up and you look at them and you go, Do you think it's amazing? They go, yeah, I bet you it's amazing. So yeah, it's not all it's cracked up to be. Stand in front of you today and I'm disjointed. I'm slightly depressed. I'm a little bit down. And you go, you can't do that. Little Johnny in the front, his mum comes to me with Percy the pig every week or whatever the fucking animal is. Sorry if I'm being derogatory. I can't be seen to be weak. No, that's just seen to be human. And you inspire these beautiful souls to realize that chasing what they perceive to be success in society isn't going to be enough. But you know who heals the most in that moment? You, because you've suddenly shared your burden with somebody. And how I can tell you that story from an absolute place of complete truth, not speculation, is because that happened to me. I found myself in a school which every single person on earth should speak in a high school, because there's something about young people that you just, not that I bullshit adults, but you can't bullshit them. You just can't be the facade. You can't do it. And this young man said to me one day, I'll never forget this. It was the most profound moment ever. I think it was one of the highest, up there with washing a naked man, believe it or not, in India. There's 2 or 3 of these massively pivotal moments in my life where everything just felt and looked and shifted. And this young man said to me, he says, so why did you not go to college? And I had my usual bullshit line. Oh, I didn't want to go to college. I want to be an entrepreneur, which was my insecure, protective self. And I looked at this little young man. He's about 13, beautiful eyes. And I looked at him and said, this is how insecure I said, laugh if you want to, but I was dyslexic. And I said, I wanted to go to college. I just couldn't because I failed every exam. And he just went like this. He just opened his body, his heart to me. And suddenly I went, oh my gosh, the first time I've ever spoken about the thing I was the most ashamed, one of the things I was the most ashamed about. So you don't have to give it up. Just carve out some emotional space to contemplate experimentation in some way, shape, or form. How could you impact people in some way, shape, or form? That's all I'm asking people to do. The opposite is too big for us to imagine. So we shut it down and we do nothing about it.
Beautiful. And take another half hour just on that little spot right there.
I'm going to share one thing here very quickly. And I'm going to use this in case this goes out in audio as well. I've got a placemat here, like for putting your coffee or hot drinks on. And the way I describe it very, very quickly is often we've got something inside of us and it lies outside of what we're doing. So there's what we're doing currently in the world. And then there's this idea. So let's just say what we're doing currently is my right front or my left front pocket. And then I push someone and go, yeah, but if you weren't a vet, you didn't work in the veterinary industry or you wanted to pivot in it, what would it be? And I go, well, like kind of like the guys, I'd run a podcast or I'd write a book about being a vet and whatever. And I go, yeah, but you're not allowed to do that. Well, what's in the back pocket? And then they reach over and they say, and they go, well, it's just this little insignificant thing. Go, well, what is it? Well, it's nothing. It's just this book idea, or I just want to do a blog, or I just want to do, it's just about changing the whole landscape of how we see the world or something like this. And I go, what? And the reason that back pocket idea often never, ever gets to see the light of day, it never gets to come out and dance, it never gets to play, is because we'd rather fail every day at doing something we don't truly want to do, that we can always say, well, my heart wasn't 100% in it. You walk up to a bar, and I'm going to use women because there's 3 men, it could be men, and there's 2 women at the bar, and the one on the right, you've been in love with for 25 years since high school. And the one on the left, you met 3 months ago. The one you'd most likely asked out for a drink or out for a date is the one on the left, because you can't risk, often, you can, but most of us don't want to risk failing at the essence of who we are. And the sadness is that idea in the back pocket is the one that never gets to see the light of day. And I believe every single vet in the world has that idea. And it's not necessarily about being in the veterinary world. And that's okay. But can you carve out some time to play? It could be 1 day a year and just see what the joy. And by the way, if you start to play with this idea, how do you think that would affect your mental health in your core business? Because you get to bring your artistry and you get to bring your giftedness into the world. Your veterinary practice is not depriving that in the world. And that, if I say nothing else in this call, that, if I can get that across today, that just landed. That's how we often see this thing is deprived. We often blame our children. Oh, well, when I was free, before I had kids. Bullshit. Because people say, well, I can't do that now because of kids. I go, what was your excuse before you had kids? Oh, well, I wasn't enough money or I didn't know whatever. Don't use your kids as an excuse. So we end up becoming resentful of the things that we perceive to be debilitating us or taking us away from our gift. And that's where we become a victim and we go around in circles. We blame the fucking world. We blame everybody. We blame the cat. We blame the postman. We blame the shitty podcast on the day that we're down and a great podcast on the days that we're up. And so on. I don't mean it's a shitty podcast. I hope you know what I mean. We blame that asshole Irish guy with his Irish accent. We blame everybody. Oh, it's easy for you. People often say it's easy for you. You're sitting on millions. No, I'm not. And when I started this journey, I had nothing. I was underwater to hundreds of thousands. And it didn't make any logical sense to go after what I do professionally. In a country called Canada, where I knew nobody. And I set up a coaching business in the greatest recession this humanity has seen in our lifetimes, in a country I knew nobody, and I still did it because this is what I'm here to do.
Philip, I love that. I can already tell I'll be re-listening to that a few times. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Philip. I don't know, I guess I probably had some expectations around this episode. I've been wanting to have you on for quite a long time. And I just am excited to unleash you to the veterinary world. And I think this message is going to resonate.
Thank you. I really appreciate the kindness and just the consideration and the space that you've created. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't all about you guys. It was just trying to create the space for the right message. And I could feel that. I knew that was going to be from you, Michael. I didn't know Jonathan, obviously, but I really, even the question you asked Jonathan, that slightly more personal question, just shows that you care about your community. And that's a lovely thing to see. It's not everywhere. It's not as common as we'd like that to be necessarily. So I'm grateful to be a part of this. And hopefully we made impact or an insight into even one person's life today. That would be fantastic.
Well, Philip, there will be those that would like to follow along, follow your journey, maybe step into some of your work. Where can they find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they step into that?
Yeah, so Philip McKernan is the website, philipmckерnan.com, and I do some social activity. I'm not as marketing driven, perhaps, as some organizations. And if it's available to you, come to Brave Soul in Ireland. It's a week-long, deep, immersive experience that is the work I wish I had done 20 years before I started my own journey, or at least 10 years before it. And that's the richest work that I've created. And that'll fast track a lot of people and help you avoid pitfalls that I think are unnecessary and bring you back to yourself and allow you to reconnect with what's important so you can navigate a more aligned life moving forward. That's the work we do.
Nice. Okay, well, thank you so much. I mean, it would be a shame. You are one of the most profound question askers that I think I've ever met. So we're changing up our normal ending of the impact round here. We're going to give you the opportunity to ask a question. So just leave out there for the veterinary community for them to ponder. And then we'll leave the final word to you with what message would you like to leave for the veterinary community?
Wow, no pressure, hey?
A lot of pressure.
I think there's a couple of questions that have been emerging for me. One is an older question, and that is, what is the one conversation that you're avoiding in your life? And that conversation can be with yourself or a loved one or a colleague or whatever. But the question that has come up is based on the conversation we had, the question that's come up that I adore this question. It took me a long time just to craft this question. And that is, if I can remember it precisely, and that is, what do you know deep down you need to do? What do you know deep down you need to do? But for whatever reason, you're not ready to do it right now. And that's okay. And the reason that that's okay is to take the judgment away and replace it with compassion. So what do you know you need to do deep down, but you're not ready to do it right now? And that's okay. It's about naming your truth, but not feeling pressure to execute it. And I would respectfully ask you to sit with that question and see what emerges. In terms of the last word, I guess considering your audience, I would love if I had one wish and I could reach in and give everyone a magic bullet or a wish or whatever it would be, is that if you could find the time and the place as a vet, and again, this is not rehearsed, I wasn't expecting this to come up at all, but if you could begin to give yourself even a fraction of the compassion that, in my experience, most vets give to either animals and or the owners, but to carve out some time to actually create a healthy relationship with yourself where you actually give yourself a degree of compassion. Because in my experience, vets are very hard on themselves. And to me, I think that comes at a very detrimental cost to our own sanity, our own inner peace, and our own mind. So I'll leave it at that. That's what's coming up.
Thank you for listening to the Veterinary Project Podcast. As a recap on behalf of our hosts, the Veterinary Project Podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks. So be sure to tune in as we bring you more conversations aimed at helping you enjoy a life well lived. If you enjoyed what you heard on the show and want to stay in the know, please like, love, and or subscribe to the podcast on the listening platform of your choosing, as we're available on all the usual suspects. If you know of others who may benefit from these conversations, we'd love it if you shared the show with them. This helps us to grow our community and reach more and more veterinary professionals, just like you. Speaking of which, if you would like to get connected with more like-minded individuals who are joining us on this journey, please send us a message via Instagram @The Veterinary Project, and we'll invite you to be a part of our private Facebook group. General feedback, requests for information, or requests to be a guest on the show can also be sent via direct message to our Instagram @The Veterinary Project. Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll catch you again in 2 weeks for another episode of the Veterinary Project podcast. Bye for now.